She was just 8 years old, poor, hungry, and desperate. So she walked up to a billionaire's mansion and asked, "Can I trade your leftovers for a miracle?" He laughed in her face. But what happened next shocked the entire world and changed his life forever. 8-year-old Zuri James had nothing. No father, barely enough food, and a mother who worked 2 exhausting jobs just to keep the lights on and a roof over their heads. Their tiny apartment on the south side of the city had cracked windows, peeling paint, and a fridge that often hummed louder than it cooled. But to Zuri, it was still home. It was where her little brother Malik giggled while playing with toy cars made of bottle caps. It was where her mother, Tanya, would kiss their foreheads each night, even when her feet ached too much to stand. Zuri had learned early that wishing didn't fill empty stomachs. Each morning, she would walk to school in secondhand sneakers that were one size too small, her backpack stitched at the corners by her mother's careful hands. Most days she skipped lunch, pretending she wasn't hungry. She saved a small carton of milk from the school cafeteria to bring home for Malik. No one had to tell her how to survive. She just knew. Every evening, when school ended and the city began to slow down, Zuri would walk past the grandest mansion she had ever seen, the towering white estate on Hillcrest Avenue. Its gates were tall and black with golden tips, almost like they guarded a kingdom. Behind them, the house sat like a palace. Marble columns, endless glass windows, and a garden so perfect it looked fake. Rumors swirled in the neighborhood about who lived there. Some kids said it was haunted. Others claimed it belonged to a ghost billionaire who never came out. But Zuri had overheard her mother talking once. "That's Carlton Gray's place," Tanya had whispered on the phone. "Used to be a genius in tech. Got into a helicopter crash. Paralyzed. Doesn't show his face anymore." That stuck with Zuri. Not because she understood what being a millionaire meant, but because the idea of someone who had everything suddenly losing it all made her heart ache. It felt familiar, in a way. Pain without warning. Life without fairness. Most days she just passed the mansion, staring in awe. But one particular evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, her hunger clawed at her harder than usual. Her stomach growled so loud it made her wince. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, a single piece of toast. Malik had taken the last of the instant noodles that afternoon, and her mother wouldn't be home from the diner until midnight. She was about to turn back toward her neighborhood when she noticed a man in a white chef's coat step out from the mansion side gate. He was carrying a tray, a large, silver one like the kind she'd seen in movies, and he looked annoyed. Zuri ducked behind a lamppost and watched. The man walked over to a pair of bins beside the hedge. With a sigh, he lifted the lid and dumped the entire tray inside. She caught a glimpse. A thick, juicy steak, untouched. Roasted potatoes, glistening with herbs. A slice of bread with a golden crust. Steam was still rising from it. Her mouth watered instantly. Her first thought wasn't even for herself. Malik. He hadn't eaten anything solid all day. Before she could stop herself, Zuri darted out from behind the post and ran to the man. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, breathless. Her little legs carried her quickly across the pavement. The man turned, startled. He looked to be in his 30s, with tired eyes and a face that suggested he wasn't in the mood for conversation. "What?" he asked, not unkindly, just confused. Zuri pointed at the bin. "Can I have that?" "The food." He blinked, glancing toward the tray, now resting on top of the garbage. "It's garbage," he said, brushing his hands together. Zuri shook her head. "It's food," she replied, her voice steady despite the nervous pounding in her chest. "My brother hasn't eaten since yesterday." The man hesitated. Something about her tone, maybe the quiet urgency, maybe the way she clutched her hands together like she was holding onto the last bit of pride she had, made him pause. He looked around, unsure of what to say. It's not for the public," he murmured. "This is private property." "I know," Zuri said quickly, "but you were throwing it away. Please." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just looked up at him with large, determined brown eyes, standing in her worn sneakers and her too-thin jacket, trying not to look at the tray, even though it was all she could think about. For a moment, the man just stared. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the soles of his shoes, He reached into the bin and pulled the tray back out. "It's still warm," he muttered. He glanced over his shoulder toward the mansion. "Look, I'll pretend I didn't see anything. Just take it and go." Zuri's eyes lit up. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She grabbed the tray, carefully, holding it like it was made of diamonds, and turned to leave, but not before looking back. "Wait," she said softly. The man turned. "What now? Who lives here?" "The man who didn't eat this." The chef narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Gray. Carlton Gray." "What?" Zuri clutched the tray closer and gave a small smile. "I just want to know who gave my brother dinner." With that, she ran back toward her side of town, her heart pounding in gratitude, her arms full of warmth. What she didn't see was the silhouette of a man watching from the second-story window, his wheelchair hidden in the shadows. Carlton Gray had seen everything, and for the first time in years, he was curious. Inside the mansion, Mr. Carlton Gray sat silently in his sleek, custom-built motorized wheelchair, positioned perfectly near the enormous bay window that overlooked the front garden. The evening light poured in, golden and soft, casting long shadows on the polished floors and imported furniture. He barely noticed anymore. The world outside that glass might as well have been another planet. For Carlton, life had become a loop of stillness and silence. Once, he had been a name whispered in boardrooms, printed on magazine covers, and applauded on international stages. Carlton Gray, the genius behind Gray Tech, a software empire that revolutionized communications in over 40 countries. Billionaire by 35. Feature on Time's Most Influential. Private jets, 5 homes, 2 honorary doctorates. He had everything until the crash. A chopper ride over the Pacific for a tech summit in Hong Kong had changed everything. One malfunction, one emergency landing gone wrong. When he woke up in the hospital, he couldn't feel his legs. At first, he thought it was the painkillers. Then the doctor's face told him the truth. Spinal cord damage. Complete paralysis from the waist down. No surgery, no therapy, no innovation could undo it. That was 3 years ago. In those years, Carlton had become a ghost in his own life. The company ran without him. He had appointed a board to keep things afloat. His properties remained in perfect condition, maintained by quiet, respectful staff. His phone rarely rang anymore, and when it did, it was either a lawyer, an accountant, or someone pretending not to pity him. The only person he saw regularly was his live-in nurse, Amelia, a kind but firm woman in her early 50s who had worked with many spinal injury patients. She never asked questions, never made small talk unless he initiated it, and never commented when he sat silently at the window for hours. That evening, as Carlton sat there staring out with blank eyes, watching the orange light flicker through the trees like fire on water, Amelia stepped in. Her voice, soft but deliberate, broke the silence. "Sir, there's a girl outside. She asked for your leftovers." Carlton blinked, slowly turning his head toward her. "My what?" "Your dinner," Amelia said gently. One of the kitchen staff was about to toss the tray when she ran up and asked for it. He let out a dry laugh, short, bitter, and humorless. "And what did he say?" He hesitated, then gave it to her. "She's gone now." Carlton scoffed, shaking his head. "Tell them this isn't a soup kitchen. I don't need kids digging through my garbage like I'm some kind of food bank." Amelia hesitated, and that caught his attention. "What?" he asked. "She asked about you," she said. "Wanted to know who gave her brother dinner." That made him pause. His hands rested still on the armrests of his chair. His mind wandered for a moment to a time when people didn't just take from him, but looked up to him. A time when giving meant press releases and publicity. Now it was just a little girl with nothing, saying thank you in her own quiet way. For reasons he didn't fully understand, he said, "Wait. If she comes back, bring her in." Amelia nodded once, without question. The next evening, Zuri did come back. Same time, same hunger. But this time, she was led through the massive iron gates, past a neatly trimmed hedge maze, and into a marble-floored foyer that echoed with every footstep she took. Her eyes were wide, darting from the chandelier above to the gleaming staircase, winding up like something from a fairy tale. She followed Amelia down a long hall until they reached a sunroom filled with light, modern art, and silence. Carlton sat there, facing her. His wheelchair was matte black, sleek and high-tech, but the man in it looked tired, his sharp cheekbones hollow, his hair peppered with more gray than black. Zuri's small hands clutched the hem of her jacket. She was nervous, but not scared. Carlton raised an eyebrow. "So, you're the little miracle worker?" She tilted her head. "I didn't say that. You asked for my leftovers," he said, his tone dry. "And in return, you promised what exactly?" Zuri didn't blink. A miracle. There was something so steady about the way she said it. No embarrassment, no sarcasm, just calm certainty. Carlton chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. "A miracle," he repeated. "You planning to walk on water next?" She shook her head. "No, I just pray." He studied her. "You pray? Every night? For people? For my brother? For strangers? For you? You don't even know me," he said. "I do now," she replied. Carlton leaned back slightly. This wasn't the conversation he expected. He was used to people trembling in his presence, either from nerves or greed. But this girl, this tiny, skinny thing with worn shoes and oversized eyes, stood before him like she belonged there. "And you think your prayer is worth a steak and potatoes?" Zuri shrugged. "It's worth more, but I'm not charging you." That made him smile just barely. "So how does it work?" he asked, half mocking. "You say a few words, and boom, I walk again?" She nodded. "Could happen. But even if it doesn't, maybe you'll feel better." Carlton looked out the window, then back at her. "Fine," he said at last. "You can eat the leftovers if you pray." Zuri smiled. Not like someone who just won a prize, but like someone who already expected a win. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside his chair as Amelia returned with the untouched dinner tray. Zuri placed her tiny hands together, bowed her head, and whispered softly, "Dear God, thank you for this food. And thank you for Mr. Gray. I don't know why his legs stopped working, but I hope his heart still does. Help him feel better. Help him smile. And maybe help him stand. One day, if that's okay. Amen." When she finished, she opened her eyes and looked up at Carlton. He said nothing, but for the first time in 3 years, something inside him shifted. Something he couldn't explain. A warmth he hadn't felt since before the crash. A flicker of something dangerously close to hope. He didn't say it out loud, but he whispered it to himself that night when the lights were off and no one was around. Maybe, just maybe, Carlton raised a brow, his lips curving ever so slightly into an amused smirk. "And what miracle can a little girl like you offer me?" he asked, folding his arms with a mixture of cynicism and curiosity. His voice carried the cold sarcasm of a man who had been let down too many times, by doctors, by fate, and perhaps even by God himself. Zuri didn't flinch. She didn't look away or laugh nervously like most adults did around Carlton. She simply stood straighter, as if the question had given her even more confidence. Her eyes sparkled, not with childish innocence, but with quiet conviction. "Every time I eat," she began, "I say a special prayer." "A prayer," Carlton repeated, raising an eyebrow higher, almost entertained now. Zuri nodded firmly. "Mama says my prayers work." Carlton let out a half-laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "Your prayers work? You think you can fix something doctors from Switzerland, Tokyo, and Los Angeles couldn't?" He gestured down to his paralyzed legs, covered neatly by a soft wool blanket. "You know what happened to me, kid? My spine is shattered. I had 3 surgeries just to stay alive. I've had every kind of nerve therapy and futuristic nonsense you could imagine. I even spent 6 months in a floating chamber in Dubai." Zuri listened quietly, not intimidated by the list or his tone. When he was done, she simply shrugged. "Can't hurt to try," she said. There was no arrogance in her voice, no challenge, just honesty. Simple, pure, unshakable. Something about her courage, her refusal to be intimidated by his billions, his bitterness, or his brokenness, made Carlton pause. For the first time in years, someone wasn't treating him like a fragile relic or a sad story. She didn't pity him. She believed in something bigger. He narrowed his eyes, still searching for a crack in her resolve. "You're serious?" Zuri nodded again. "Yes, sir." Carlton stared at her for a long moment, silent. Then he let out a sigh, long, resigned, and oddly amused. "Fine. he said, motioning toward the tray Amelia had left on a small table nearby. You can eat the leftovers if you pray. Zuri didn't wait to be told twice. She carefully walked over to the tray, her small hands lifting the silver cover to reveal a warm plate of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and glazed carrots. Steam still curled from the edges, and the scent made her stomach flutter with anticipation. She sat down cross-legged on the thick Persian rug in front of him, the plate in her lap. But before taking a bite, she closed her eyes, laced her fingers together, and bowed her head. Carlton leaned forward slightly, watching with detached curiosity, half expecting her to mumble something childish or silly. But what came out was neither silly nor childish. Her voice was soft but clear. Her words were simple, but carried more weight than he expected. "Dear God, thank you for this food," she whispered. "Thank you for letting Mr. Gray share it with me. I know he's hurting, even if he doesn't say it. I know he used to walk and run and laugh, and now he sits alone in this big, quiet house." Carlton blinked. Zuri continued, her eyes still closed, her little face serene. "I don't know why you let bad things happen, but maybe you can fix his legs. Or, if not that, maybe you can fix his smile. Because I think he misses being happy, and everyone needs something to look forward to." She opened her eyes slowly and looked up at him. Amen. Carlton didn't move. He couldn't. For a moment, the room seemed frozen in place, silent, sacred. Her prayer wasn't full of fancy words or dramatic begging. It wasn't religious in the way he remembered from his childhood, when he was dragged to Sunday school in pressed slacks and shiny shoes. It was something else. It was raw, real, unfiltered. He'd had therapists talk to him, specialists, pastors, motivational speakers. They all came with notes, degrees, smiles. None of them reached him. But this little girl, in her worn-out jacket and dusty sneakers, had sat on his floor and spoken straight into a part of him he thought was long dead. He didn't realize his fingers had clenched the edge of his wheelchair's armrest until he looked down and saw the whiteness of his knuckles. "You really believe that did something?" he asked after a long pause. Zuri tilted her head. "Don't you?" He gave a small, dry laugh. "I'm not exactly a believer." She smiled and took her first bite. "That's okay. I believe enough for both of us." Carlton watched her eat. She didn't rush, didn't scarf it down like someone who hadn't eaten in days, though he suspected she probably hadn't. She savored it every bite. She looked up and thanked Amelia when she brought a glass of water. She used her napkin, and when she finished, she folded her hands in her lap. "Thank you, Mr. Gray," she said politely, "for the food." Carlton nodded slightly, still trying to process what had just happened. As Amelia led her back to the door, Zuri turned one last time. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said cheerfully, "just in case the miracle needs more prayers." Carlton raised an eyebrow again. "So this is a series now?" She grinned. Miracles take time. When the door shut behind her, Carlton was left alone with the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the fading scent of roasted chicken. He looked down at his legs, still motionless beneath the blanket. Same as always, but something felt different. It wasn't physical. He didn't twitch or move. No phantom sensation. But inside, somewhere deep and buried, he felt a crack in the wall he had built around himself. A thread of warmth that hadn't existed the day before. A ripple of something he'd once sworn off. Not hope, not yet, but something close. That night, as the staff retired and the mansion dimmed, Carlton sat in bed staring at the ceiling. And for the first time in years, he whispered into the darkness, barely audible, "Please, just let me feel again." And far away, in a modest apartment across the city, Zuri knelt beside her bed, hands folded, eyes closed, whispering again, "God, I think he's starting to believe." Zuri returned the next day, and the next, and the day after that. Like clockwork, each afternoon around 5, she'd walk up to the grand gates of the mansion on Hillcrest Avenue, her small hands gripping the straps of her tattered backpack, her hair neatly tied with a faded pink ribbon. Amelia would greet her with a soft smile and lead her through the marble halls, past polished paintings and golden vases, into the sunroom where Carlton always waited, whether he admitted it or not. At first, Carlton was skeptical of her visits. He'd never say it, but deep down, he thought she'd get bored and stop coming. Maybe she'd lose interest once the food stopped being exciting. Maybe her mother would find out and forbid her from going. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd realize he wasn't worth praying for. But none of that happened. Zuri showed up every single day. She sat in the same spot, cross-legged on the rug in front of him, hands folded before she ate. She prayed softly, but confidently. Sometimes she whispered a short blessing. Other days, she'd speak longer, talking to God like he was sitting right next to her. "God," she once said, "I don't know if Mr. Gray's legs are ready to work yet, but maybe you can help him smile a little more today. He needs that." Carlton, hearing this, felt a strange tightness in his throat. He turned his head so she wouldn't see his eyes watering. But Zuri didn't just pray. After eating, she stayed to talk. At first, it was small things, a funny moment at school, something her little brother Malik said, or how her teacher, Miss Harper, always wore the same perfume. Then she began asking questions. What's the biggest thing you ever built? Did you ever meet a president? Why do rich people have so many couches? Carlton answered reluctantly at first, his responses dry and short. But Zuri was persistent, and her curiosity was contagious. Before long, he found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about his first invention, a voice-controlled light switch he built at age 12. He told her about the night he rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, and how nervous he was even though he wore a $10,000 suit. He told her about the time he flew to Tokyo for a tech conference and ended up lost in the subway for 3 hours. Zuri laughed, wide-eyed, her cheeks glowing with wonder. She even sang to him once, just a few lines of an old gospel song her mother used to hum while doing dishes. Carlton chuckled. "You're braver than most people I know." Zuri grinned. "That's 'cause I got nothing to lose." The house changed with her presence. Staff who used to walk silently now smiled when they saw her. The chef began preparing little extras for her. An apple tart, a warm cookie, a cup of cocoa. Amelia started humming while working. Even Carlton's expression softened. He no longer kept his eyes on the window during their time together. He looked at her. He listened. And eventually, he began to hope. Just a little. Then something happened. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after Zuri had first entered his mansion. Carlton sat alone in the sunroom after she had left. His eyes were on the carpet where she usually sat, and his mind was 1,000 miles away when he suddenly felt something. A sensation. A tickle? A spark? He blinked and looked down. His right foot. His toes. He concentrated, uncertain. Was it his imagination? A dream? He tried again, focused all his energy downward. And there it was. The slightest twitch. His toes moved. His breath caught in his throat. "Amelia," he called, his voice cracking. She rushed in, startled. "Sir." He looked up at her, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" She followed his gaze to his foot. It twitched again. She gasped, covering her mouth. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I saw it." The next morning, Carlton had a team of doctors flown in from 3 different states. They ran every test imaginable, checking reflexes, reviewing scans, poking and prodding. When they finished, they were speechless. "This doesn't make sense," one doctor muttered, flipping through a clipboard. The injury was classified as permanent. Total spinal disruption. This shouldn't be happening. But it was happening. Carlton didn't say much during the examination. He kept thinking about Zuri's voice, her little prayer, the way she said it as if she truly expected the impossible. Later that day, when Zuri arrived and found him smiling slightly, she sat down like always and asked, "Anything feel different today?" Carlton stared at her for a second, then smirked. "Maybe," he said. Her eyes sparkled. "Told you. Miracles happen." By the end of the 3rd week, he could flex both feet. By the 4th, his ankles moved. It was slow, painful, exhausting, but undeniable. Zuri never bragged. She didn't claim credit. She just kept coming, eating quietly, praying humbly, and reminding him gently that some miracles take time. Once, while helping him practice with a physical therapist in the mansion's gym, Carlton whispered to Amelia, "You think she's an angel?" Amelia smiled. "No wings. No halo. Carlton laughed. Still feels like heaven sent her. One afternoon, after a particularly strong session where Carlton stood with assistants for the first time in years, he turned to Zuri and asked, "Why me?" She looked confused. "What do you mean? Why'd you choose to pray for me?" he clarified. "You didn't know me. I could have been mean." "I was mean." Zuri shrugged. "I saw you through the window. You looked like you needed it." "That simple?" he asked. She nodded. "You were sad. And alone. That's when people need miracles the most." Carlton couldn't argue with that. She was right. And day by day, prayer by prayer, twitch by twitch, his miracle was unfolding before him. Not from some billionaire breakthrough, but from the kindness, faith, and courage of an 8-year-old girl who had nothing except everything that mattered. By the end of the 5th week, Carlton stood, unassisted, for the first time in nearly 3 years. Staff cried. Amelia hugged him. Zuri clapped like it was the best school recital she'd ever seen. And Carlton? He didn't just smile. He wept. Not out of pain, but gratitude. Because somewhere between the prayer and the plate of leftovers, he had been given back far more than his legs. He had been given back his life. Months passed, and the quiet miracle that had started in the sunroom of Carlton Gray's mansion continued to unfold, slowly but surely. Physical therapy sessions became daily routines. Where there had once been stillness, there was now movement. Where there had once been silence, laughter had returned. Carlton's body, once numb and unresponsive, now responded to touch, to effort, to will. And even more stunning than the progress in his legs was the change in his heart. With every passing week, Carlton grew stronger, not just in muscle, but in spirit. He no longer stared out the window, wishing the world away. Now, he greeted each morning with intention. His mind, once clouded by bitterness, was now filled with ideas again. Not for profit, but for purpose. He was walking again. Yes, but more than that, he was living again. By the 3rd month, he had moved from a wheelchair to a pair of sleek, matte black crutches. He hated how slow the process was, but each step felt earned, sacred. His medical team was astounded. The man they'd written off had become the case study that challenged their textbooks. "You are a medical anomaly," one specialist told him, shaking his head in disbelief. "A miracle, really?" Carlton smiled faintly. "No, she is." By then, Zuri's daily visits had slowed. Not because she lost interest, but because school had resumed and her mother had picked up more hours of the diner. But once or twice a week, she still stopped by after school, a backpack full of homework and stories. She no longer came for food. She came to check on Carlton's progress, to see how far her prayer had reached. "Not bad, Mr. Gray," she would say when he managed a full lap around the garden path. "Not bad for an old guy, huh?" He'd chuckle back. The bond they had formed was unexplainable, unbreakable. One was a billionaire who had once felt like the loneliest man alive. The other, a little girl from the city's most forgotten block, who had somehow become his anchor. Then one morning, early, before the sun had fully climbed over the horizon, Carlton stood in his closet, eyeing a black tailored suit he hadn't worn in 3 years. With Amelia's help, he slipped it on. Button by button, he dressed with care, like a man preparing for something sacred. By 9 a.m., Carlton Gray walked out of the gates of his mansion. Walked without help. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't perfect. But it was powerful. The neighborhood buzzed as his black SUV slowly followed him down the cracked sidewalks of the Lower East Side, where people knew him only from headlines and rumors. Children stopped playing. Old men on porches straightened in their chairs. Mothers held their toddlers closer, whispering his name in disbelief. He walked 3 full blocks, one careful step at a time, until he reached a run-down brick building with rusted balconies and a faded number 714 on the front door. There were clotheslines strung across the courtyard, and the scent of frying onions drifted down from a nearby window. Carlton took a deep breath and knocked. After a few moments, the door creaked open, and there stood Ms. Tanya, Zuri's mother. She was in her diner uniform, her hair wrapped in a scarf, her eyes filled with exhaustion and worry, until she saw him. She blinked twice. "Mr. Gray," she gasped. "Oh my God, you're walking?" Carlton nodded. He could feel the neighborhood watching, but he didn't care. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee on her cracked front step. "Ms. Tanya," he began, voice soft but steady, "your daughter saved my life. I want to return the favor." Before she could respond, he reached into the pocket of his blazer and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a document clearing all her debts, rent, utility bills, loans, everything. She stared at it, hand trembling. What is this?" "Freedom," Carlton said gently. "And a fresh start." Tears sprang to her eyes. "But why us?" He looked up at her, expression serious. "Because your little girl asked for a miracle and gave me one instead. Because no one else believed I could be whole again. She did." At that moment, Zuri came running down the hall, her little brother Malik behind her. She paused when she saw Carlton, eyes going wide with joy. "You came," she squealed. He stood carefully, smiling. "I told you miracles happen." Zuri ran to him and hugged him tightly. It took everything in Carlton not to cry right there in front of half the neighborhood. "But that's not all," he continued, looking back at Tanya. "I've also made arrangements to enroll Zuri and Malik in Crestwood Academy. It's one of the top schools in the state, fully paid. Uniforms, transportation, everything. And when they graduate, their college tuition will be waiting." Tanya's knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the doorframe for support. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say thank you to your daughter," he said, "and let me do the rest." That evening, Carlton held a press conference outside Gray Tech headquarters, standing proudly behind the podium with only a cane for support. Journalists swarmed, cameras flashing, live feeds broadcasting around the world. Everyone wanted to know how. How had the paralyzed tech giant, once confined to a wheelchair, defied every medical prognosis? Carlton cleared his throat, leaning into the microphone. "I know what the world is expecting," he said. "Some new treatment, a breakthrough device, a scientific revolution. But the truth is far simpler and far more powerful." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small pink ribbon. "This belonged to an 8-year-old girl named Zuri James," he continued. "She came to my home one night, asking for my leftovers in exchange for a prayer." Laughter rippled through the crowd, uncertain and confused. "I laughed too," Carlton said. But her faith never wavered. Every day, she came back. She prayed. She believed. And somehow, her belief changed everything. I didn't just get the feeling back in my legs. I got something more important back. He paused, voice thick with emotion. My soul. There was silence. Complete, reverent silence. I spent decades building wealth, status, power, but I had forgotten how to connect. Zuri reminded me that miracles don't always come from labs or billion-dollar inventions. Sometimes they come from the heart of a hungry little girl with nothing but hope. The crowd erupted in applause. In the following weeks, Carlton set up the Zuri Foundation, dedicated to helping underprivileged children access education, healthcare, and nourishment. The slogan was simple: feed a child, fuel a miracle. Zuri became a quiet celebrity in the city. She didn't like the attention much. She still wore her old pink ribbon and still prayed before every meal. But sometimes, when she looked up at the sky, she whispered, "Thank you," knowing full well that her prayer had reached places even the richest man in town never could. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.